Perfect. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the WeHero Learn series. We're very eager to let our audience learn about you, learn about Realize Worth, and hopefully give them some really powerful tips on volunteerism and what's happening in the world of social impact and CSR. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Chris, I think first question, hopefully the easiest question, who is Chris Jarvis? Who are you? How did you get into this world of social impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. Who's Chris Jarvis? I think I pay a lot of money to a therapist to figure that out. So I don't know how much I can give away here for free. My journey in this space, this is kind of the gist of the conversation, began back in the 90s. And I was involved in some work at a small town outside of Toronto, in a suburb of Toronto. We were starting a drop-in. Well, I didn't know anything about that. Long story of how I even got involved in it, but that was the beginning of sort of a divergence from what I had grown up being taught and told, and then some of the realities that I was confronted with when I went to Toronto and met with some people who actually knew what was going around in the city with homeless youth. So that was a bit mind-blowing. And then running the drop-in was also mind-blowing, just stuff that kids were dealing with at ages that they shouldn't even have to think about, that kind of thing. And I know that's kind of naive and privileged to be able to say that, but that's where I was coming from, naive and privileged. I think that's a great way to describe myself. And began a journey, and in that journey sort of realized that I wanted to rethink everything about what I believed and what I held to be true, challenge those convictions and my role in the world. So for me, it was very much about relearning kind of a worldview and being open and questioning absolutely everything, finding some people who could guide me through that process. And that began the new trajectory. And it was through that I kind of began to understand the incredibly potent role of the simple idea of volunteering, that you can go somewhere, be confronted with a reality that challenges your beliefs about who you are and the world, and can be kind of like an epiphany, where you have this sort of, oh my God, what have I been thinking? What do I think now? What should I be thinking?
Can we pull on a thread there that you mentioned, Chris? Worldview. I think so many of us are looking for that, right? Worldview. Yeah. And when we go and we talk about volunteerism, in some cases we're trying to give people that. But talk about your process of expanding your worldview. You talked about meeting some mentors and going through some steps. Like, what were those steps that you took?
Yeah, there's kind of two parts that I've come to understand this many years later. So that was early. I began, I would say, this journey of my life back in 92, which is funny to not say 2000 in front of a number is funny to me now, but 1992. And there was this external sort of space that I was going to or in, and people who were sort of guides to help me navigate the realities of, soup kitchens and men's missions and addiction issues. And then there's the internal process where I was this is where I now, this many years later, understanding a little bit more about neuroscience, not being a neuroscientist and behavioral change. I was going through a process where my neural net was reconfiguring itself. And so you mentioned the term worldview, which is a nice term. It's kind of a psychological term to describe how we see and perceive the world. But in neuroscience, your worldview is your neural net, and you can only see the world the way your neural net is configured. You can imagine other ways of seeing the world, but even in those imaginations, the constructs that you come up with are based on your lived experience and what you know. You can't escape your brain, and neither could I. And so if I was going to have not an enlarged worldview, but a radically reconfigured worldview, I needed to reconfigure the neural net in my brain. Now, again, I didn't know that's what was happening, but that's the process that I went through these experiences over a period of time.
So talk to us a little bit about Realize Worth, because from an outsider looking in and hearing you talk about that experience, it seems you have taken that experience you've gone through and you're helping companies almost go through that experience, if you will, with realized worth. So could you share a little bit about realized worth with our audience?
Yeah, that is a great insight, Ben, that I don't think most people understand, is that all I have been doing since day one, either for myself or then working with nonprofits and then starting to work with companies, is working to create space where other people can have that moment of epiphany and challenge what they believe to be true, and how they see themselves and how they act in the world. And so that is, that's the complete process. Now, we can get into the details of how we do that realized worth, but just for listeners who may not have heard of us, Realized Worth is a small firm that works with very large companies on designing and implementing employee volunteering programs, with the goal that you take a transformative approach, which means creating space for that to happen, versus a transactional approach. And I do want to clarify, if for anybody who's taking a transactional approach to volunteering, which means the primary goal is the task and getting the work done, that's not bad. That's good. It just leaves a lot of value on the table in terms of what your employees are experiencing and how they're being changed.
A question I have for you is, you've been doing this and kind of taking everyone through the journey that you went through. Do you think, you compare it 1992 to the 2000s and to today, has it gotten easier or harder to take people through that same journey?
Easier. Now, I will say easier from a systems and sort of a global consciousness perspective. So CSR has evolved. I think most people use CSR and ESG interchangeably. We tend to use the term corporate citizenship because we're talking about the human quotient, the individual employees who are the actors to actually do the work. They activate the work. They're ambassadors. They can speak to the work, and they are authenticators. So they can tell you whether what the company's talking about in its press releases is a real deal or not. And I mean, let's be honest, most employees, when they read in the paper what their companies are doing, they roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever, right? Because they're thinking about the last interaction they have with their manager, which is really what the company culture is like, but they're not going to put that in the paper. So, and yet the geopolitical climate is saying private sector, take a bigger role in diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, health and safety, fair wages. And so with, let's face it, most religious leaders are sidestepping that because they don't want to get pulled into it. And political leaders can't. I mean, President Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, like that was 50-50 till yesterday, right? So it's very hard, I think, for politicians to lead. And so the private sector is stepping into the gap in these areas. And so to answer your question, that does provide a better door through which to talk about how are people changing their points, their views, their beliefs. Are they challenging their biases? That is, people are quite open to that. Whereas early on, it was like, oh, that's nice. We'll get to that if we have lots of extra cash and time.
Yeah, no, it's a great feedback. And I imagine it's somewhat contagious. If you take employees through this process, if they transfer to a different company, I imagine they can share that. It may not be as effective as their first company, but it's somewhat contagious through the effort.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's kind of the trick of the transformative approach, is once it's internalized, you don't just turn that off any more than if somebody you really cared about passed away. You don't just turn that memory off. That affects you the rest of your life. First time you fell in love, that affects you the rest of your life. Your baby, oh my gosh, that definitely affects you the rest of your life. And this kind of experience, if it's transformative, it does affect the trajectory of your life.
Chris, when you're taking companies through that transformative process, what are like some of the largest roadblocks that you notice? What are those sticky points in the process where it's like, oh, this is going to take some time to resolve? I'm curious what those moments are and what those roadblocks are.
So the roadblocks to taking this transformative approach. Okay, the number one roadblock: human beings hate the concept of time. We never have enough of it. We're running out of it, and everything takes too much of it. So this kind of work takes years. companies have a mindset of a quarter, right? And companies tend to, okay, I'm not sure how the audience will deal with this, but the company concept of time is more akin to a goldfish, it feels like. In that, and that's also the public sentiment too. You're only as good as your last quarter. And then if you're not good this quarter, I don't care how good you've been for the past decade, we're going to penalize you for what you did in the last 3 months, kind of thing. And so that applies to a lot of things. Some of it has been positive. But in this case, human behavior change, neural growth takes time. You need continual exposure to experiences over a period of time. And so I think a number of people that we work with, gung-ho at the beginning, love the concept. Sorry, how long is this going to take? Like, we're not seeing the results that we were hoping for. And it's been, 3 months. So that's, I would say, the biggest obstacle is time.
To help with that, when you're meeting with companies, do you have, you realize this has been doing this work for so long. Do you have case studies of companies that are doing this really well, that have gone through this process, and you're seeing them perform at an optimal level when it comes to engaging employees and volunteering and giving in a powerful way?
Well, that kind of depends, because everybody has a different understanding of the term engagement and a successful program. So we break down companies into 5 stages of citizenship. In the 3rd stage, you're kind of service oriented. You're like doing a month of giving or a day of giving. And it's about participation. How can we get a lot of people to participate? And you're providing services to your employees. It's kind of like a benefit thing. And when they talk about engagement and success, how many people, how many hours, how much money, how many nonprofits, it's a very output oriented, success. If you spend a little bit of time in there, the obvious question, unless you're just sort of bored and kicking back and phoning in your job, you're doing it, it's fine. But most people aren't like that in these roles. And they think, well, it feels like we could get more out of this. Like, I'm glad, we have 30% participation and we've got 1 million hours, but I don't know if I know what that's doing. And so they start to think about engagement in terms of something that can be more internalized, something that can change people's perspective. It's not quite the 5th level, which is transformative, but it's at that level that we like to work with companies to help them see success, because they've already decided that they want to define success and engagement beyond that. Now, you asked, do you have any good models or good examples? Only in terms of companies that have reconfigured their approach to account for the irrational choices that human beings make, right? Like, we're not all rationally weighing, should I go volunteer? Shouldn't I volunteer? That's not how we make decisions. So they've adjusted the decision-making model or choice architecture model. They've also thought through their systems, and they have a clear logic model and an approach theory of change. They've begun to ask better questions about engagement. I'll give you an example. A way better question about real engagement is, I'll give you 3. Okay, Ben? Number 1, did you enjoy your time here volunteering today? Do you feel you made a meaningful contribution? You're going to say, yeah, sure I did. How likely on a scale of 1 to 10 are you to talk about this event with friends and family afterwards? Oh, it was pretty good. And there was that thing with the paint. Yeah, 10, definitely going to talk to people about that, because I have to explain why my shirt's covered in paint. Okay, great. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to involve a colleague and bring them with you to the next event within the next quarter? Oh, I don't know. Everybody's so busy. I don't know, maybe 6 or 7. Well, we know on a net promoter score, that means not good enough, right? And it needs to be engaging enough that it was so valuable that I tell other people, in the same way as I have a good restaurant experience, and I just blab about it to everybody. No emails to remind me to do it. Nobody's paying me. There's no incentive. There's no reward. The restaurant won't even really know about it. But there's enough inherent value in that sharing of that, opportunity, that it elevates my status among my peers to share that good information. And that's the level that these experiences need to get to. And we do have some companies that are doing much better at that.
I have an interesting question for you, and feel free to push back on this question, Chris, but to give people some ideas of what an experience could look like, or a volunteer experience could look like, I have a question for you. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a volunteer at a company, what is your ideal volunteer experience? Walk me through that hour or 2 hours. What are you going to experience? What are the chapters of that experience? I just want to understand, in your eyes, what's that ideal volunteer experience? You as the volunteer going through that. What do you
Right. Right. Okay. Well, let's do an A/B version of it. The A version is the typical one. I go because my friend at work has asked me to go so many times, and for whatever reason, I'm just like, oh my, I'll go. Okay, fine, I'll go. Like, I don't volunteer. I'm not a bad person or anything, but I'm so busy. I don't even understand how my friend has this much time. But he's my friend, so I'm going to go. So I'm extrinsically motivated. Number one. I'm probably going to show up late because I've got other things going on, and honest to God, it's volunteering. So if anybody complains that I'm 10 minutes late, I will lose my mind because I showed up on a Saturday for this stupid thing. Three, I just show up and I'm given a role and told where to go, and I do it, and I have to keep checking. Like, I run out of things to do, and I'm probably standing around talking, which is fine because a bunch of other people that I don't know. But in the end, I think, did they even need me? Because I like painted for 30 minutes. Couldn't somebody else have done this if they were running this better? And then afterwards, everybody's high-fiving and thanks for painting. And I do feel good about that. Remember, I'm not a curmudgeon. And I feel like we get some good stuff done. And I guess it's a hostel for youth, or I don't really know. Somebody said something. They give me a lot of stats. And I got to keep the t-shirt. I'm out of here. Good, done. That's my one time a year. I'm done. Tick it off the box. 3 hours. Am I going to log those hours? Are you kidding? I gave you 3 hours. I'm not going to spend another hour to try and figure out how to put hours in for the company. Who cares? That's your typical, right? Okay. A good one would be, Bill invites me to go. I go because he's my friend. I don't have time. I'm too busy. I show up late because it's my first time. They better be thankful that I showed up at all. Nobody better complain. But when I get there, there's a brief that's going to happen in 10 minutes. So they're having it at 1/2 the hour to account for people like me. And then we get into the brief and we talk about what we're going to do, how we're going to get it done, safety protocols and all that. And then why does this matter? And in the why, they do something where they create proximity to the beneficiary. So they talk about who we're helping. It's not a list of bullets or stats. It's not how well the nonprofit is done. It's not how many youth are living on the street. Honest to God, that's important information. But remember, I don't care. Like, I've got nothing there's no place to connect that to in me. Like, I care. Of course I care, but I don't care. So what they do in the brief is they tell a story about a kid and what he's facing and what he's doing. And in that storytelling, they tell me that, listen, you're probably wondering how painting helps this kid. His problem is not his lack of high school education or no work skills, or the fact that he's been dealing with addiction. I'll tell you what his number one problem is. He thinks he deserves bad things in life. Like, absolutely everything bad that happens, you're a screw up, you deserve it. So we bring them to a beautiful house and we paint the house. And when they look at this beautiful trim that the volunteers come in and make clean, and the windows that they wash and the things that they repair, we tell them, you know what, this is a beautiful place, isn't it? Yep. You deserve to be here. Whatever. No, you deserve to be here. You're working hard. And the community came in because they think you deserve it too. You deserve it. We got your back. His biggest obstacle, that kid's biggest obstacle, was the belief that they don't deserve it. And painting gave them dignity, the ability to believe that they do have value. This is where we get our name, Realize Worth, because if I can realize my true worth and live out of it by contributing and giving to others what they need to survive and thrive, that I live a much better life than I was before. And so they do that brief. They've explained the significance of the task, and they've told a story where I can imagine what it would be like to be that kid. That's the thing. I have to be able to imagine the mind of the other. And then we do it. Bill keeps checking on me. Do you have enough to do this? I'm never standing around. I get to talk to people, but somebody's always making sure I'm doing something, because my default setting is, if I'm not contributing, if I'm not productive, then how valuable was it? It's a thing that the West has developed over time. Just being doesn't have much value, and it's awkward. And then at the back end, a debrief. And two simple, gets us all in the kitchen, two simple questions. What did you experience? Was it what you expected? And there, those two questions, what did you experience? Was it what you expected? Creates cognitive dissonance. I thought it was coming because of these reasons and this. It's uninformed. I'm just sense making with what I have. And then I have this experience and they filled in some gaps and these two things crash into each other. I was thinking these kids on the street are lazy, no good. They should get a job. And now I'm thinking, wait, that's not right. And if that's not right, is what I believe right? And if what I believe isn't right, how do I act when I walk by them? I mean, it's challenging everything and I've got to resolve that. And then I leave and the key is to be able to revisit it again within a month, 2 months. I need to revisit those pathways and I need ongoing discussion. I need to be able to think through what that is, that through rational discourse, and then go back and have an experience again. That's a great employee volunteering experience versus come and do a task, keep the t-shirt. Thanks for coming. That's a helper, model. This is a belonging model.
That was great anecdotes. Kind of the check the box versus the, what I think of as really a value add experience that creates the promoter attitude.
Yeah.
One of the things that popped up as you were sharing those anecdotes was the responsibility of nonprofits in this.
Yeah.
And, I think we all work with both nonprofits and companies. And so we see both sides, but I'd be curious, your take on how much, should nonprofits be driving this? Do they have the resources to drive a lot of this versus a company really driving it, given they have more resources?
Yeah. I think the companies are moving out of a time where they were fairly infantilized by the civil society or the nonprofit sector. Nonprofits would look at them as, a resource for cash and skills when and where that was necessary. But I mean, volunteers, what a pain. Like I got to do volunteering because you're not going to give me any money otherwise, but I could, if you just gave me the money, I could hire somebody to do it and it'd be quicker, more efficient, right? But that doesn't change society's perspectives on these issues. And until we internalize and say, you know what, if we ever get to a place in the United States and Canada where we could look at homelessness and say, that's not right, that's not normal, we need to get rid of that, like we did with, I don't know, sending kids to the mines when they were 10 years old. It's illegal now, right? So we can change it, but laws will follow perspective of individuals. And my perspective is never going to change if I never have an experience with it and begin to ask new questions. So that's part of an answer, Andy. What was the other part of the question? Do you recall?
Well, yeah, it was really a genesis of, should nonprofits be recognizing the change that needs to happen just as much as companies now? Yeah.
So, but the other part of the equation is companies haven't really owned their responsibility to run events and or to train their employees. And so we do have some very large brands that have taken their champions or ambassadors through a training program. They get certified and they know how to find a nonprofit, how to put together an event, how to recruit people, how to get everybody to record their hours. And they work with thousands of employees across 100,000 size employees at a company. But a couple thousand would be certified as these champions. And they basically make it happen. And the role of the team is to make sure that they have the resources and what they need. So that gets the company up to a performing level as a true partner. But the nonprofit sector is not getting the investment it needs to meet that. If you talk about things like Dollar for Doers, 95% of nonprofits that I've talked to over the past 3 years, when I asked for a show of hands, how many people have heard of that? They don't know it. And so because of that, double the donation figures $4 to $7 billion doesn't go to community investment because employees aren't claiming it, nonprofits aren't getting it, which is significant because the nonprofit sector contributes $4 billion to national giving in the United States. 4%. It's more than that. It's close to 20 billion, but it's only 4%. It's not much. But I think you've hit on something I feel pretty strongly about, that the private sector should be investing in their partners to get their capacity up so they can meet as peers. And right now there's way more money and people than there's a place to go.
Yeah, and that probably gets you from, I think you called it stage 3 of corporate citizenship, is when they're turning to the nonprofits and saying, hey, we need to do this event. We're going to have 200
Yeah.
people. Let's get
Yeah.
output Y, versus
Yeah.
you start going to stage 4 and stage 5, your partners, to try to drive overall change.
Bingo. You nailed it. That's exactly right.
Great concept. Yeah.
We've been actually toying with an idea around this. I'm calling it, I don't know what we'll call it, but for right now, skill sets volunteering, which is, could you bring a couple companies together with from different industries, say tech and consulting, and say, what problem do you want to solve? And find a third nonprofit partner who can be the voice of the community that's being affected by this social environmental issue. And then all three of them as a triad, at least, work on solving the problem, rather than the older model, which is, how can we help that nonprofit? So again, just that mindset change. And if you put two companies with each other, honest to God, the performance goes up, because, well, who wants to look like an idiot next to your peer company, right? And honestly, some of these companies are working with each other already. So you got to make it brilliant. So I think that kind of dynamic could be something that really ups the game.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the past conversation, just thinking about, what we're talking about in regards to storytelling and empathy, and just the challenge for nonprofits, because we lean on nonprofits so much for that aspect, right? Like, we almost can't go anywhere else. It's really, and we see that time and time again, where we're talking nonprofits, they're strapped for bandwidth. And in some cause areas, it's kind of like, you're all we have to, really convey the stories, really help us understand and be empathetic towards the individuals that we're going to impact today. So I definitely see that, in just how we need to get companies to invest behind these nonprofits, so we can do more of that for more long-term impact.
Yeah, and on that storytelling, it's interesting. Just a quick story. When we flew into Denver, we met a team from Ball Corp. We were working with them for a while in Denver, and we went to a food bank, and we showed up, and they were going to have someone there who could talk about it. That person was the custodian, and we said, "Can you share a little bit about this?" And he went, "Oh, hell no." We were like, "Okay." So I had done a little bit of research before, so I said, your champion, they were all champions. What you'll need to do in this situation is have done some work on your own, read up, read some stories that are out there. And then I just shared, and I did that whole brief and debrief that I described earlier. And that may be the level of ownership that companies need to have until the nonprofits can get there, or it maybe in those situations, that's the level that I think companies need to be able to of responsibility to step into.
It's funny, because I think back, the human mind reacts to stories. That is what drives us. And every other part of the business world has transitioned to that. Marketing is now a storytelling job.
Yeah.
Finance is telling the story of your accounting system, so you know what to create in the next year, or what you can afford to create. It seems like it's almost a natural transition in this, which is a more nascent part of the corporate structure.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. Human beings only learn. I was reading this in Dr. Eagleman. He's a neuroscientist, David Eagleman, and he was pointing out that the way we learn, let's say you and I were going to learn, Andy, how to fly a helicopter, an old Huey, let's say, and you grew up riding horses, and I grew up driving cars. Your way of learning would be scaffolded onto horse riding. You would learn all of that information on top of your neural net that had the information about horse riding, because it's scaffold memory building. And I would learn it differently. And that kind of diversity, that kind of way of learning and understanding is really important, because when we tell stories, we free up the bullets to fit the individual's diverse experience. And so you can take a story and make it your own much easier than just this many people, this many hours. It's that kind of thing. It really doesn't have anywhere to go the same way. It not that it's not important, it's just not compelling.
Well, you probably get a much better reaction to those bullets after I've already been hooked.
Oh yeah,
and can envision.
See, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Chris, I think, we have a lot of folks with, purely human curiosity, wondering what the next few years are going to look like. And I think we're all curious what the next few years are going to look like. And I'm curious on your take in regards to what is exciting you right now about corporate citizenship? Like, and when you look out 1 year, 5 years, like what's getting you really excited right now for this industry?
So this is going to seem a little bit, I forget what the term is, but I'm about to compliment WeHero, and there's a point here. There are more organizations coming in with more ideas and more services and more support for the sector. It's absolutely critical. So what you're doing at your company and creating conversations that are accessible like this is part of a huge movement that I think is creating groundswell, insight, knowledge, resources that are so much better than where we were 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I think the second thing is it's going to become more intentional. So I see sort of a divergence happening. On the one hand, the recent CECP report, giving in numbers, 2021, for the first time listed something called total social value. Now, companies like Salesforce for the past year or so have been talking about the social value of the contribution. They have the 1+1+1. So they do a good job of counting non-financial contributions to kind of show it's a big deal. But their non-financial contributions don't necessarily mean free. They could be a reduced cost or something like that. Plus, they count, we're doing this work internally around health and safety and whatnot. So CECP has included any internal efforts around DEI, health and safety, those kinds of things that normally would have just been, if you're a good business, you'd have these things, right? But now it's being folded into total social value, which I don't think is bad. But if you equate community investment in dealing with issues to we bought slightly more expensive pencils because they're organic or ethically sourced, that is not a one-to-one trade, right? And so the divergence I see are some companies saying, are you kidding? We can count the things that we're doing already and it totals this much money. Let's just do that, right? Because it's numbers and it's big and everybody wants to see it. And they're counting it now in CCP. Over here, you see sort of that kind of trend is, well, we have a mandate. We are not just private sector over here getting stuff from society, civil society, contributing to society. The lines are blurred and everything we do should be contributing to society. And we want to ramp up and we want to move to stage 4, stage 5 in our citizenship. We want to be transformative. We want to give people the skills they need. So when they're dealing with issues like, am I a racist? They can help people move to an anti-racist point of view, and they guide them step by step through experiential learning to challenge biases in a way that doesn't make them feel ashamed or threatened. It does, but it will move them along. So you're going to see two kinds of companies. And on paper, I think their contributions to society could look pretty similar. And it won't be until you open the door and walk inside, you'll be able to tell, okay, these people just put out memos and press releases, and these people are actually doing the hard work. And I suppose maybe that's no different than previously, but what's in that equation is quite significantly different, I think, now than, say, 30 years ago.
You know, as I think about you kind of being this leader in converting the minds of the volunteer at these companies, you know, if you could find a way to quantify the percentage of empathetic employees due to volunteering and have that be a metric, that would probably define it. But, you know, everyone likes metrics, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we've launched a program through the RW Institute, which is Nudge the Good, which is introducing behavioral science to nudge those who don't to try it, either giving or volunteering, and to nudge those who do a little to go further. And that's where you can get into experiential learning through volunteering towards DEI or towards some other aspect, challenging bias and that kind of thing. So with that in mind, my long-term plan, it's not fixed or set or anything, but I would love to reproduce a bit of research called The Knowledge out of the UK, where cabbies have to spend 4 years memorizing the maps of London. And this has been reproduced a number of times. And you can actually put them in an MRI and then give them some street names and whatnot. And before, zero light up, obviously. Afterwards, boom, big light up, right? So the brain has changed. It now recognizes and responds quite differently. I'd love to do that with employees who 4 years ago didn't know anything about homelessness, began volunteering with a company, and then show them pictures of homeless people later, and see how their brain has rebuilt itself to see the world differently. That to me would be like, this is the best proof possible that this approach. Culture is just the external construct of our internal worldview together. So this is what really needs to happen to shift culture at a company.
If you ever do that experiment, Chris, let us know. Happy to volunteer my brain if you want to do me. More than happy to commit to that.
Yeah. Well, I think the first few versions when we're baselining will be really disappointing for people, because we're going to take a page out of Dr. Sana Harris's work. You can look that up, or I can send some notes that you can include, where he puts people in MRI and shows them pictures of people, and the medial prefrontal cortex lights up quite nicely, because that's the part of the brain in 1/17 millionth of a second, I think, recognizes humans versus non-humans. But then you throw in pictures of homeless people, it doesn't activate. Unless you have an experience with a homeless person, it never activates, because they're too far from our own understanding of what a human being is. And this is why human beings are susceptible to genocide, because we're so easily manipulated by propaganda. We can dehumanize those people because they're a threat and we need to get rid of them. It just happens over and over again.
There's an incredible Netflix documentary coming out that they just released the trailer called Lead Me Home, which I'll send to you guys. It's one of their featured documentaries coming out this year. And it's all about the stories of homelessness to communicate what needs to change.
Okay.
And so it'd be a fascinating study to run before you see the movie, after you see the movie.
Yeah.
But overall, further to the point of, people recognizing the potential of stories. So
please do send that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Final question I have for you. I'm sure Ben may have one more. If someone were to hand you $1,000 tomorrow and say you can only give it to one nonprofit, which nonprofit would it be?
Probably the RW Institute, because I have to raise money for that thing. Self-serving. That was the term I was looking for when I was talking about WeHero. It's a little self-serving to talk about how great you are when I'm on your interview. Yeah. So, but there's another one that I might consider. Let's say I had a good month at RW Institute. Ladders to Leaders here in Baltimore. There's an individual working with a number of people in the community, but the phrase he introduced me to and I love now is returning citizens, because in America, we incarcerate more of our citizens than any other country in the world. And when they return, not to see them as, perps or convicts or criminals, but returning citizens, and he works with them to get them back on track. I definitely would give that to him.
And Chris, I don't have final questions. I have like 10 or 20 more questions I can ask you all day. And if I had,
I'm good to go. Let's keep going.
If I had a glass of wine, we'd be here for 4 or 5 hours plus. But no, I think my last question is there anything else that you'd like to convey to our audience, and include in that ways that people can continue following your work, find realized worth? How can people stay in touch with the work you all are doing?
Okay. My advocation would be there are two parts of your company, and they're blending more and more. And I think that's a good thing. So I'm not against the total social value idea at all. I just wouldn't want to see, organic pencils as an excuse to ignore a bunch of other things. But the work you're doing on the citizenship side, creating space for people to have epiphanies and realize their true worth and live out of it. It is not the car you own or the amount of money in your bank or the size of your house. And it is not how much you buy, sell. It's not how fast you are, pretty you are. There's a value that you have inside yourself that can only be found when you give to somebody else what they need to have agency and move forward in life. that's when you realize what it really means to be a human being on this planet with the rest of us. And so we named it Realize Worth. And so while everybody else may be selling widgets and making widgets, which is important, and you should do that, the people on this side of the equation are building nations. We're not building a company. Your work goes well beyond what's happening in that quarter or that year or that decade. You are giving people experiences that last a lifetime and translate to their friends and family, and that influence the perspective of the next generation and set the course for humanity. So they're building a company, you're building a nation, hopefully a global world, connected world as well. So my advocation would be more intentional. Move past the outputs of how many people, how many places, how much money, how many hours, and think more intentionally about how to create space so people can have an aha moment and ask really important questions about themselves, what they believe, and how they act in the world. That saves a species. That's the role, that's the job that I think most CSR managers in this role, that's the job they have. And so just own it, lean into it, take it on, and understand what's at stake, and then live with that, as opposed to stage 3, which you got to go through. Good events, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's so much more.
I love that. We've been on phone calls, obviously, with CSR leaders every week. And one of the things that we've started doing is saying, thank you, we appreciate you. And some of them go, why? And I think it's like, the conversation is, you do so much and your job is so hard and there's so much you're capable of doing. And you've been given this power and this ability to use the voices and unite the voices of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And there's a huge power to that. I think it's just something we'd start saying is like, we appreciate you. Thank you for doing this work.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Chris, this has been amazing. How can people, again, follow you, Realize Worth, where can they find you?
Yeah, realizeworth.com, or you can check out more of the frontier thinking crazy stuff on rw.institute. If you want to make $1,000 donation so I can donate it to somebody like the Institute, that's great too. You can find it there. We have a couple different kinds of newsletters that go out. One is a list of all the online events and recordings like this one here, whenever we can find them. The other newsletter, we promote a little bit of RW stuff, but usually we feature the work of other organizations like WeHero and some others to just create awareness of the broad field. So you can easily find us there.
For those watching and listening and that want to make $1,000 donation, we will have links in the blog aligned with this. Also, we've covered a lot of different topic areas today, and we will make sure we provide links and resources in the blog following up on this. So, Chris, thank you immensely again. Andy and I, as we've talked before in the past, that we've been following your work for a long time, and we just appreciate you being a thought leader in this space and helping more companies do this work, because we think there's great long-term success to come from it. And so we appreciate you, and thank you for giving us the time today.
It's been my pleasure. It's great to be on the road with people like you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.